So we're coming full circle, to the same topic that got me to change my thumbnail style, to talk about the rise of a DM-era deck in a meta light in the Rush Duel format. Surprised anyone listened to me then, so I hope that this finds you well, because we're doing it again, but this time with a deck a lot closer to my heart. Also an entirely different dynamic than the last strategy we covered. And yes, this one is also named for its own particular legend monster that you don't really need to play. This is how Jinzo got good. Before we start, I'll go ahead and put the Rush Duel rules up here on the screen. Since the script is already long enough as it is, I don't want to spend more time dedicated to explaining it. If you're familiar already, sweet. If you're not, and you feel like a Wikipedia grab isn't enough, I have some resources in the description. Jinzo is a theme that's always been much less realized than most of the DM and GX decks which are actually seeing print. You can't really rewrite the identity of the Esperoba robot when it barely has one. So, what the Rush Duel design team did instead is give us the scraps that exist. Some of these are pretty damn old in terms of their TCG version, but one of their best cards comes from as recent as 2020 in Master formats. Jinzo the Machine Menace is a level 7 dark machine with 2400 attack and 1500 defense. The original special summons itself while there's a trap card on either field or in either graveyard, and becomes level 6 when it hits the field, but since trap cards can't be face up in Rush, the Rush counterpart neglects to acknowledge them in such a state, and keeps the original level. The OG tributes itself as a quick effect in the main phase to special summon a Jinzo from hand or graveyard, but the new guy only summons from the graveyard. When this Jinzo is summoned, both these cards peek at the opponent's back row and destroy all trap cards they possess. Only the original is restricted to a once per turn effect, due to that being a very rare requirement in Rush. I promise you that this is the most complicated of the reworks, but it felt important to show you how completely a card can change in the process of being imported, yet share the same name. Ryza is an easy non-Jinzo example of how subtle the changes can be. Without a chain link system to work with, Ryza can't work on summon, so you just use it during the main phase you normal summoned it. Vibe, function, and flow matter more than a literal translation, something certain people involved in the sub versus dub argument need to figure out. Our next rework is Jinzo Returner. This dark machine is a level 3 with 600 attack and 1400 defense, which simply sends itself from the field to the graveyard to special summon a Jinzo from the graveyard. The original, while it can attack directly, only summons a Jinzo upon being sent to the graveyard, instead of doing it itself, and also offs the Jinzo you summon in the end phase. It's honestly a reasonable trade-off for losing the direct attack effect, but don't worry, that aspect of the deck hasn't been forgotten. You can still find it represented in the take of Jinzo number 7 if it reached a little higher. Jinzo 7.7. Get it? Because 7s, like Yu-Gi-Oh? Jinzo 7.7 is a level 2 dark machine with 700 attack and 700 defense, completely committed to the bit. You have to tuck a monster from the graveyard in the bottom of the deck, which is another sneak peek at what the true identity of Jinzo is, and adds 1 or 2 cards, a Machine Inspector, or an Accelerator card, from your graveyard to your hand. Inspector, we'll get back to that when we talk about Rush Duel original Jinzos. Accelerator is literally a buffed amplifier, not much more than that. This version can be equipped to any machine monster and gives it 300 attack, but if it's equipped to a face-up Jinzo, it does the amplifier thing and turns the Jinzo trap lock one-sided. And thank goodness it doesn't off the equipped monster when it leaves the field. That would be absolutely uncalled for. I don't touch this one typically, but it is there for you. Although you might think it necessary, the way that Jinzo works in Master formats, if you can really call it working, you go about countering trap cards in a slightly different way here. You see, the payoff is simple. Here it is, and it's the Jinzo name replacer you were probably all expecting. After all, one copy of the guy would be a big letdown in terms of trying to resolve anything. It isn't a complete replacement though, and its name only becomes Jinzo well in the graveyard. Once it hits the field though, it's the mighty Jinzo amplified. Besides the name replacement, it's a level 7 dark machine with 2400 attack and 1500 defense. It is Jinzo after all. Once it's on the field, you mill a card to gain immunity to destruction by trap effects this turn, and 100 attack per machine monster in your graveyard until the end phase. While it's not as easy to get your stats up as it would be for Obsidian Magical Soldier, you can still reach above the 3500s easy. The last piece here is also an incredible way to fill up your graveyard, and kind of the whole reason this deck works. That would be Machine Inspector, a normal spell that excavates the top 4 cards of each player's deck, and sends any trap cards or machine monsters found among them from either deck to the graveyard. And if a trap card was sent from earlier, you get to draw one card. But either way, both players tuck the rest on the bottom of their deck in any order. If none are hit, cards remain on top of the deck in the same order. Funny how it works. It's a really easy card to loop, although you cannot do that turn 1 thanks to the battle-centric effect of 7.7, but you do get to use it plenty. Thinning the deck, returning various staple monsters and payoffs to the draw pool, and actively tutoring them to the top of your deck, all while drawing deeper, tends to get you pretty far, and you can anticipate what you'll draw at a certain point if you play with some savvy. Eventually though, you will run out of trap cards in either player's decks, and that's when the role of this card changes. Machines specifically have a good number of cards that also shuffle your resources back in, so if you don't like the order of things when you take a peek, you can use your shuffle or payoffs to get a do-over. And for the TCG Brained, I am once again reminding you how few once per turns we have, and how this isn't one of them. If you draw another one, you can just dig right in. In a world where a mill can be just as good as a draw, this level of versatility, which robs your opponent of their trap cards before they can even become a threat, is very welcome. In fact, this card is so good at sending trap cards that it becomes the optimal way to play by having an assortment of your own, with a couple of absurd payoffs. I know, it's a Jinzo deck that plays trap cards, but even if you forego Jinzo for the rise that we mentioned much earlier, you still maintain much of the identity of an anti-trap utility strategy. What really brings a deck like that into the spotlight though, is a format rich with fantastic trap cards. I'm not going deep on 7 treasures again, it's a trade-in for level 7s, that's easy enough. The Jinzo theme focuses so hard on the use of level 7 monsters, rather than deciding on a more traditional Jinzo stat line, to play into the strength of as many staples as possible. Necromaid Nana was limited a good while ago, and for good reason. Level 7 remains the superior level for your average tribute monster, and her effect tucking to bottom and drawing 2 is the biggest no-brainer the deck could ask for. Clearing itself as a level 5 tribute can blank your field and allow for you to use your Hamayas and another staple we'll talk about. Nana is great, I wouldn't be surprised to see it become a second banned card on the list. Also another light monster, by the way. Fadronir is a tricky card, a quote-unquote free draw 1 that you don't want to see turn 1. If you have not drawn a card this turn, the turn you normal summoned it, both players draw 1 card. On turn 1, if you use this, you're giving your opponent a full hand, giving them a 1-card draw, resulting in 6 in hand. Afterwards, it matters much less, but you can still accidentally facilitate an opponent's trap card that needs a card in hand to work, which we'll go into later. I'm saying that a lot, but trust me, it's effectively a +1 in maybe 85% of cases. Really neat card. Cards that mill are incredibly important to the tempo of rush decks, and while plenty can stand side by side with different advantages to existing, sometimes the best is just the best. Right now, that would be Deathtickle, a Dark Galaxy type with 1000 attack and 1300 defense, which is a stat line useful to a deck we're not talking about today. For our purposes, it's a mill 3 on the turn it's normal summoned, and if you haven't done effect damage yet that turn, similar to how Fadronir works with its draw, you can inflict 700 effect damage. Given I play a slightly jankier variant, the pure mass of mills makes up for some of the less flexible cards in the brew. What a welcome sight. Bolt Tricorn is a really nice staple we probably would consider even if it weren't machine type, but since it is, we get to shuffle it back extra good. Another one that works with your field if you have no other monsters, by milling 1 and locking your opponent's back row until the next turn. I mean, you gotta pick one, but it locks a good one. Summon response and battle traps must be respected, so this is a great way to get ahead, and spend the rest of your removal elsewhere. Besides, this is another way to shut down trap cards in a Jinzo deck, so not only are we playing in the spirit of winning, but also in the name of flavor. Mirror Innovator, an iconic machine boss monster which is basically our panic button to get out of any boss. Its base 2400 attack on a level 7 is relatively standard if not a bit low, but you can get to 4k and above if you're shuffling the large ones, and piercing utility is peak. It also just happens to be the perfect course corrector for your mills when they're getting out of hand. When you're putting another copy of itself back with the shuffle effect, you're ensuring a grind game. This is a little side section dedicated to Pot of Greed. I guess I'm going to work it in with how some of these other ones worked because I had no idea where it was going to go in during scripting, but Pot of Greed is especially important to talk about here, so I'm taking the chance. This is real. This is real. In my last Rush Duel video, I made a point to share that Pot of Greed being played in the Dark Magician Spellcaster pile was a bit of an exception, and that it was generally an underwhelming legend. Things have changed a bit since then. It's not like Graceful Charity isn't around or playable anymore, it very much is. But the advantages of Pot of Greed are especially helpful in the current climate. Jest of the Cosmo Princess is the most definitive removal spell since Legend Strike, and it's not a short leap either. Going from a Reborn that sometimes pops back row to Twin Twister's roided up deep draw cousin, which is much less conditional than the already flexible Legend Strike, you really feel the difference. Specifically, it's a normal spell that discards 3, at least 2 monsters included, and destroys up to 2 cards on your opponent's field, and if you did, and your opponent still has 2 cards on the field or more, you get to draw 2. Graveyard setup, clearing the board, and a mulligan on the hand. You have to keep this card in mind for deck building. You can use it on the draw going second, and if you have to let it set for a turn, and you draw 5 your next draw phase, it will be even easier to get to the ratios you needed. It's not always a free board breaker, but it often is. I could go further into it, but that's not our topic today. If you want me to go deeper on the dynamics between popular modern staples, and tell you about how a few other decks with names you might recognize function, let me know. They fixed Red Eyes. I'm serious. But besides that, I'm sure you can see why having a straight plus is better than Charity for this card. Greed is also a really nasty include with Machine Inspection, and its deck-thinning, stay-winning playstyle. Once you know roughly where Pot of Greed is in your deck, and how to recover it if need be, you can count on it to show up. When your draws consist of a select few cards you've curated, Jinzo's gameplay reaches its peak. It's good to have tribute material for your big guys, but with more monsters around like Machine Menace that can bring themselves out with a special summon condition, high-level draws are increasingly versatile. Tangent over. Do you like negates? Rush has a few of them, and they're pretty neat. In more recent sets, they're a bit closer to what you might expect, but overall there's a healthy chunk of attack negates in the mix that do alright. This includes the classic negate attack as a legend, without a main phase 2 to speak of, and a heavy reliance on big hitters. There's lots of reasons to pick this legend. Yes, it isn't as explosive as Cylinder or destructive as Mirror Force, but it does come with Negate War Dragon, a level 4 dragon that mills 2 on the turn it's normal summoned, and if you happen to have negate attack on your field, up to 3 of your opponent's monsters lose 2,000 attack until the end of your opponent's next turn. The mill effect is enough to make this a comparable normal summon to a lot of generics, but that attack reduction is an absolute game winner. This package is a bit more flexible than the next one up, since you can at least use the monster independently. However, I'm a much bigger fan of our next one, which makes Jinzo into the deck I love. This is the build I play. This would be Trap Mole of the Trap Hole. That's right, we got multiple trap holes, and none of the tricks. Anyway, Trap Mole is a simple level 3 beast with 600 attack and 900 defense that can set any trap card from your graveyard during the turn you normal summon it if Trap Hole was already in your grave. This effect on a monster is beautiful. You have no idea how much I love it. Already we have plenty of effects to return spells and monsters, but rarely do they intersect so efficiently. Amaya's recovers spells, Trap Mole sets your traps back, Jinzo 7.7 can tuck a monster from your grave regardless of type. You can essentially keep whatever cards in rotation you like. Hey, if I'm putting all those trap cards in there, I want to see a little bit more of a payback on my investment. When you look at the sorts we got, can you blame me? There is another Trap Hole support monster, but it's a much worse Negate War Dragon that tries to convince you to use the Warrior Returning Alive. Let's back away from the Legend packages again, to show you a little bit of what the Mole can recover. Well, it's not like trap cards have been bad exactly over the lifespan of Rush Duels, but I don't recall the trap card selection ever feeling better than in mid-2024, at time of recording. You have plenty of directions to go in. I'll try to lightning round these a bit, so keep that in mind when I'm giving the overview of the trap cards. All of them are normal traps, and quite potent, even if they may seem a little underwhelming in a vacuum. These are cards you can play in Jinzo, and cards you're looking to get rid of. And all of these aren't new per se, they're all very likely new to you, so that's how we'll tackle this. Shiny Shady books 2 effect monsters on field with a discard upon an opponent's summon, granting the user 1500 life point if a guy with 1600 on the opponent's field is flipped. Great into most fusion decks, not great into Hero due to their vanilla count. Still solid. Sunset Rebirth summons a monster to your field face down from your hand or graveyard on an opponent's draw during their turn, including the draw phase, or upon the destruction of one of your cards by an opponent's. After that, you get to protect up to 3 cards on your field from card effect destruction this turn. This plays well into Jest, and the value of your big monsters is high enough that their retrieval can be more important than the protection. It unbricks you too, which is quite welcome. Star Salvation Shield also works on the opponent's draw, but also on their summons during their turn. Costing the send of a monster on your own field to the graveyard, it limits your opponent to a single attack this turn. Also, it just happens to steal your opponent's Magical Knight fusions with 3000 or more original attack, an effect that's not your main reason to play it, but can absolutely win you games you shouldn't against decks that used to be a little bit better. If you get it back with Trap Mole, but have nothing better to do with it tribute-wise, it's the perfect send to make sure your little guy doesn't get punched over. Speaking of theft, Invitation to a Delirious Dream tucks a monster from your field and a card in hand on the bottom of your deck when the opponent makes a summon. And after that, it steals a level 8 or lower monster, cannot attack or activate its effects. This doesn't steal max monsters or most fusions, but it grabs their materials quite easily. And given that the newer editions in Contact fusions tend to have lower levels to make up for their ease of access, there's more powerful stuff to steal than it would seem. And the tucking to bottom is perfectly in theme. Traditional tax is another form of theft. After an opponent's draw during their main phase, you rip 2 of your opponent's cards from the hand randomly. Drawing is an enormous help to most decks, including this one, so having the chance to entirely offset one's resources like this is super welcome, even considering how big rush draw phases are. It can be pretty easy to play around for some decks, so I keep it in the side, but you'd better believe this is one of the first trap cards I go for. Word working. When your opponent normal summons a level 7 or higher, or after they activate a spell card, you can shuffle up to 5 monsters from the graveyard into the deck. It's explosive, it's classic, it hits all the same decks it used to and more. I love it. If you want to see more of these, either pester me in this video's comment section or go look them up for yourself. I'm not your parent. You can do what you want. I'm not going to put the batteries on a high shelf. What we can do, though, is look at a couple of games together for the visual learners out there. Game 1, we're playing against 6-Axis Abyss, a deck made of Light Sea Serpent max support monsters that can be built without the max pieces, and focused into an effect destruction immune level 6 Miracle Girls, boosted up by its own effect and its theme of native attack boosts. The level 6 means that they're also a pair for executing monsters, anti-level 7 support level 6s, that summon themselves for relatively free, and become a contact fusion that can shuffle any face-up card into the deck. Those numbers can get pretty threatening, so let's see how this goes. We go first with the unfortunate turn 1 Fedronir into a dead mole, tributing them for amplified and getting our free mill, which hits the trap hole. Never stop gambling in this deck. Lumiere can shuffle our level 7 names into the deck, so I decided to take a chance here and dream to steal Lumi. They set 5 and pass to us. Our turn 3 draw is golden. We love to see this. We only managed to hit an amped, so no draw. Bad move. That could have been a jest pitch, but that's hindsight for you. Mole sets the dream back. We show out with Menace, which revives the amped and reveals the spell cards. Jest is a threat, so we set the shield and attack 1 set. The shield dumps amplified because if I have to eat a single attack, I'd prefer to not take damage. Karen mills 3, yes that's her name, including 1 Miracle Girls, and Angie hits the field without using her draw effect to go right into Miracle. At 2400, she swings into the returner. Now is when you want to see Fedronir, helping us have material and fodder for Jest, which clears the back row. Into an inspection in 7.7, which gets us 2 triggers of the spell, 2 trap hits, and 2 draws. Making Ryza an amped off returner. $3,200 is huge. With a few cards that could have turned the game around in their hand now, they don't get a chance, because the set Dream takes their boss monster, and the round. Our next game is against Dark Matter, a Dark Galaxy theme which focuses on payoffs for face-down monsters with 1300 defense and fusion plays, in the way of name changes a la Cyber Dragon in the TCG. It really is formidable, as like our 500th distinct Dark Galaxy playstyle, it has a lot of old and new to work with from the Go Rush era. This person's build is hosting a good amount of light monsters though, and Transamu Rainax stuff, so maybe this is an Omni Galaxy pile of some sort. You'll see in a moment. The Galaxy player leads with a Dead Ephyri into a level 5 Wonderlight, which puts a Deathtical and a Kraydol in the graveyard, which is great for their tributed Hazard Doll, which recovers a Kraydol, but it doesn't have a card to recover, and Polymerization and Jest to go face down. We retort with an inspection that hits Trap Hole immediately, and reveals that the opponent is on a fusion pile after all. The second inspection hits nothing, and therefore the top 4 cards of each player's deck remain exactly the same. Tricorn locks Poly, and we punch with Corn and Menace, with a really bad hand for when turn 4 happens. This time our opponent has Jest and Fedronir in pairing. A new Hazard Doll revives Greydol, Greydol grabs Fusion, and both of their names become Dark Matter Mist on the way this turn, letting them fuse into a 3200 Enigmata. Then we get Jested, but they don't get a draw at least. Brings back Doll again, which gets Fusion, and another equally large Enigmata, leaving us with 1500 life. Machine Inspector doesn't hit any traps here, so we have to go for the ol' mole for our fix instead, which sets trap holes for real this time. Our materials on field become Mirror Innovator, which becomes 4100 attack. That clears one fusion monster. They try to kill with a high-risk Ryza here, but Trap Hole takes care of that, forcing them to go into another fusion to play with Poly, making a 3k extra Plasma with no back row on Field of Mind to pop. 7.7 recovers a mole to bottom of deck, grabs Inspection, and that hits an Innovator. We go Treasures to trade in an Amplified for Hamias and Ryza. That clears the fusion monster. Deathtickle puts no new machines in the graveyard, but it does do 700 damage and gets tributed for an Amped, which wins the game. The last game is against a pre-release wave of support for a classic, Imaginary Actors, so we won't talk about it here since we don't have results yet, but the game state we reach here can be achieved against most decks, and shows what the deck can do when the card count is low. For our purposes, we'll be stepping near the end of the duel since it gets a bit complex and I want to give it the attention it deserves. On turn 6, we hit Trap Hole off Inspection, drawing another Jest. We pitch everything but Jest to clear the field and draw 2, which may have been a mistake. Tribute Summon to Menace reaches 3200 and clears their Clown. They go through the motions with their Prime plays, getting back Vanillas for low tribute counts, eliminating our back row. Just look at the field, you would guess I was in the losing position. Ashura Star doesn't have the ability to use its effect at the moment, so he and Rex just pummel me. Okay, so here we go. To start, 7.7 tucks Hamias to get Inspection. Tribute Summon Nana. We don't find trap cards this time, but the deck is still getting thinner. Nana tucks Innovator to draw 2. Inspector hits our last trap, a Rebirth, and draws Pot of Greed. Hog gets us to Inspection at another 7.7. This new one puts back Ryza and grabs an Inspection. We move our Menacing to Graveyard, and along the way we start hitting our opponent's machine bosses for spite. The second Inspection. Treasures pitches Innovator for a draw 2, which brings us Nana again, which tucks a Menace for a draw 2, bringing us to a Ryza, which we use to bounce itself. With a clear field, Hamias can shuffle 2 spell cards for a draw 1, a Menace, which peeps the useless back row, and summons Amped, and we tribute summon a Mirror Force. With the power of the graveyard, the game state is secured. At this point, you should be seeing on screen some events from the month of August, in territories where you can actually buy rush cards. I'm not going to be reading these, but in the results, whenever you can see something along the lines of Psycho Shocker, that's a Jinzo result. In terms of actual gameplay, I'm not as active as I used to be on the Rush community, although I still love it, so I thought I would ask a talented duelist with results with Jinzo for their take, along with some stuff of my own. I want to give big thanks to WIG for providing their replays from the Goha Collective's Goha Grand Opening Festival last month. Community servers keep Rush alive in the places where Konami still won't sell it, and they make videos like this easier to complete. Anyway, the finals was a Jinzo mirror. This was a round 3 victory. I know I'm going to show you 2 replays, but it's a Jinzo mirror, so I feel like 2 rounds of this is totally sufficient. They won the round anyway. I'm just gonna respect your time a little bit. Inspection on Wig's side hits an opponent's monster and trap. Treasure sends Tricorn for a draw 1. Amaya shuffles the spells for a draw 1. Treasure sends Amplified for a draw 2. Rebirth summons Amplified and protects the 3 set cards. Before Tricorn can lock a back row, Shady books it into 0 attack Hamayas. An Amped is tribute summoned, and a live Shady is set. Another Inspector leads turn 3. This one is really valuable because it hits the opponent's cylinder in a build without Mole. We now have an Amp in graveyard to revive with the returner we found. Cannon Soldier cleans up the field a bit first. And before Amp can matter, it gets hit with the Shady, but fortunately our back row is pretty good here. Another Rebirth protects Amplified and the back row. Vadronir Ryza is a nasty hand for the opponent. They really have a lot. Rebirth and Reborn face down for the opponent, alongside the threat of their huge bosses. This is exactly what Cylinder is considered for, actually. Rebirth leaves the pair of 7s protected, with only Returner vulnerable. Inspection inspects a Shady and the opponent's Innovator, and draws a Jest. The next inspection only rips machines though, which is a shame. Amplifier clears the Innovator quite easily. The additional Rebirth protects the back row and only the set guy, because those are the cards that are going to make the biggest splash next turn. The opponent gives Wig the Menace Scan, which is 2 times useless, which we now know. Monster Reborn brings back the Innovator finally, which is quite threatening on turn 6, no lie. Shady and Rebirth get set, and all that remains is Cannon Soldier on our hero's field. Rebirth puts us against all 3 of the Jinzo boss monsters, in a protected double book. Fortunately, Nana is here to draw 2 and get us out of the situation, clearing the field for a Tricorn that forces the Shady. Treasures jumps Amplified, and we get to a copy of Menacing and Ryza. Shady, Treasures, and Jest wait in the back, and the opponent gets pushed down to 1200 life points. Treasures gets 7.7 and Inspector, which is huge, although it only hits machines. When they go for a second, they hit a Shady. Clearing the hand, the field is full with a set, and 2 3400 attack amps. But Wig drawing a Machine Menace was the key to victory. The Psycho Shocker strategy makes for an extremely solid backbone to one of the spiciest playstyles I've ever engaged with. You can call me vanilla maybe, if you're used to the decades of established master format play, and don't see this stuff as anything crazy, but you're objectively wrong, like seriously. Even if you play without the trap mole, you're still piloting an extremely versatile pile that functions extremely well at various stages of play. It exists at just the right time, and serves as a fantastic example of archetype imports, although Rush does tend to knock those out of the park. Baseball. It's gonna be pretty hard for machines to top Jinzo, with how hard they showed out with this theme. Thank you for spending this time with me. Hopefully you either learned something, or got to feel smarter than the other dopes watching because you already know what's up. Either way, see you later.